Was it?
Yeah.
You can.
Yeah.
You're fine.
Yes. What? Well, because his microphone is going to be on.
Okay. All right. Let's see. And we got a couple people on the line as well. All right. Boker Tov and happy Hanukkah. I am dropping my iPad. I am here in my office, and we are joined here by Gilia and Kathy. Welcome, welcome. Janet and Will at the moment are online. So yeah. And Richard's here in person too. Welcome, welcome. I made 3 copies, so we're okay. And we're gonna definitely put this on the screen as well for those on Zoom. So hope everybody's Hanukkah has been good. Obviously, did not we began the holiday with heavy hearts.
Yeah.
And continue to have heavy hearts. We try to bring light to the darkness as best we can. So let us. So I'm going to bring this up here. I really like the direction that this is going in or the where we are in all this. I think there's some interesting topics that we are venturing into. So let's see. Okay. So we start with those who are exempt from praying the Amidah. Now, by the way, when I say that I like this, it doesn't necessarily mean that I agree with everything in it, but I mean, this is a meaty topic, I think. So, those who are exempt from praying the Amidah. And by the way, I mean, and before I get into this, I should mention that some of what we've been talking about, really, actually, very much came into practice yesterday. I was talking to a congregant who was talking about wanting to delve more into personal prayer and delve more into, making weekday prayer a part of his life. And so it's like, how would you start out? Right? Where do you begin on something like this? And so what I got to was basically saying, all right, start with these things, right? And then when you're in a position to add more, when you have more time, more fluency, more comfort, whatever it is, then add these extra things and kind of going on from there. So it's a lovely way to just remember that some of these scenarios that we've been talking about really can come up from time to time. And by the way, perhaps it goes without saying, but those who are on Zoom, just feel free to jump in, just as those who are in person will feel free to jump in as well. So it's all good. So all right, so those who are exempt from praying the Amidah, all those who are exempt from the recitation of the Shema are exempt from the Amidah prayer, and all who are obligated in the recitation of the Shema are obligated in the Amidah prayer, which you're like, well, yeah, duh, but maybe that wasn't automatically obvious, right? Because the Shema, I mean, within the Shema is the command to say the Shema, or at least, like that first paragraph is that say these words when you lie down and when you rise up. It's like within that you have that instruction. The Amidah is, regardless of what you think of the authorship of the Torah, whether it's divine, human, some combination thereof. The Amidah is 100% human written. There's no, question about that. Inspired by God, sure, but human written. So, anyway, so this is just, it's establishing this connection, right? But then we have this exception, right? Except for those who are accompanying the deceased, i.e., a funeral procession, that are not needed for the funeral bier. Bier being B-I-E-R, not other, yeah, exactly, right. It's like, unlike the funerals that drive one to drink. No, I'm kidding. Okay. For even though they are obligated in the recitation of the Shema, they are exempt from the Amidah prayer. It is interesting. Why do you think that might be?
Because you can't say such a long prayer while you were walking in a procession.
I think that's quite possible. I think also, like with the Shema, it is, as you acknowledge, it's shorter.
Yes.
Right? It's shorter. And hello?
I'm sorry to interrupt.
It's okay.
I ask if it's okay with everybody here if I take a quick picture.
Sure.
It's fine.
Which side?
Side, okay.
All right. Should we pose or should we just talk?
Just talk.
Okay. All right. Okay. So good enough.
Thank you.
So no worries. I think some of it has to do with the length of the prayer, right? The Shema versus the Amidah. The Shema is, what is it, 248 words when you combine the, all the different parts of it. I think it's 248. One can far more easily memorize that number of words compared to the Amidah, which I would imagine is more. I don't know that for sure, but I think it is more. There are a lot more elements. Also, the Shema is often said when we are literally sitting down or laying down. Here, you have to stand up during the Amidah unless there is a physical limitation. And you can say the Shema when you wake up in the morning, technically, right? Yeah, go ahead.
I read somewhere, I just didn't know if it was true, that it's the hope of every Jew that the last words from their mouth will be the Shema.
Yeah. The idea, okay, so the thought that the last words of every Jew should be the Shema. It is that is something that I think was, for lack of a better term, popularized by the story of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, being one of the great rabbis of the early Talmudic period, lived in the 2nd century BCE, and endorsed Shimon Bar Kokhba as the Messiah. Essentially said he will lead us to redemption. And as guesses go, it wasn't a bad guess, in the sense that Shimon Bar Kokhba was a successful general and did lead the people for a couple of years before the Romans caught up with everything and destroyed that. The Romans then capturing Rabbi Akiva, martyring him, and executing him literally by burning alive. Which is, yeah, it is. It is obviously a horrible tale, but the story we get from that is, as he was being burned, that he, according to the story, calmly was saying the Shema.
So I've always imagined that Jesus said the Shema on the cross, but what you're saying is he probably didn't.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, it wasn't something, it wasn't, yeah, all right.
Um, I would think that if Jesus would have been who Christians said he was, he
Hmm.
may have had a little trouble saying Adonai Echad.
Yeah, but I don't think he was who
Right,
Christians
Trinity.
say he was.
Yeah,
I mean,
no, that's
he
fair.
was a
That's fair.
Jew, and the Romans crucified him like they crucified a whole lot of other people. That's what they did.
Mhm.
That was their thing. They like to crucify people, and
Yeah.
yeah, I don't think Christianity came about for quite a while after that, actually.
No, it's true, and forgive my snark, if
No, it's
I'm
okay.
being
All right.
snarky.
No, because, I mean, I,
It's
I
the
don't
Shema even
argue with
Christian.
Christians who believe whatever they believe because they believe it, but
Sure.
I don't believe it, so.
Yeah,
That's not what they teach that he said, but was the Shema even being said at that time too?
I mean, it was probably, I mean, it probably was being said by certain Jews. I mean, uh, now I'm not as familiar with, I'm not especially familiar with Christian scriptures. I do know, isn't there a moment where Jesus says, God, why have you forsaken me?
Yeah.
Does he say that on the cross? Does he?
Yes.
I
Okay.
don't know.
Oh my God, why is that second?
No,
Yeah.
I don't.
I
So
always heard it was forgiven for they don't know what they're doing or something more lofty version
Forgive
of that.
those who do
could
not know
be,
what they
yeah.
do,
It's
yeah.
probably in Old English, like the
Mm.
Christian Bible in Old English. He spoke fluent Old English.
I mean, a lot of,
Yeah, he probably spoke Aramaic, I'm guessing.
yeah, that too.
Who
But,
But was the
back to the original,
Shema
say you will be with
well,
me.
never mind.
around at that time? Is a set prayer?
I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, my sense is that it was certainly well known. Whether everybody knew it is another question, but it certainly was well known because figuring, if the sense is that Jesus lived during the first century of the Common Era,
Mhm.
Jews had already begun creating prayer services of one sort or another. And they'd already been doing it even while the temple still stood, because the temple, the business of the temple was in sharp decline in general at that point. So people were looking for, let's say, alternatives. So anyway, so those are some of what you have there. Um, so I think it may be a matter of timing, and also why there are certain people who are, you know, where they are, where they are literally like, they're like, I can imagine that they're pallbearers, right?
Right.
They're needed for this. It's like, we are, and keeping in mind, of course, that um, at least for the time, like when there was a death, I mean, burial within 24 hours was not just the norm, it was the expectation. And so obviously a burial, is something that happens, very, I mean, it's like, okay, it's like, all right, let's take care of the body, let's prepare the body, and what have you. So obviously all these things came together very quickly. Yeah.
There's all those rules about not being distracted while you're saying the Amidah, and I would think that carrying a really heavy casket, God knows how far in the heat would be distracting.
I would think.
You wouldn't really
Yes.
be able to even if you knew it by heart. You couldn't carry a book and carry the casket at the same time, and you didn't know it by heart, and you'd be occupied with carrying the casket, so you couldn't.
Yeah, and also the idea that, what we had been talking about in recent weeks is about all the different possible distractions that we are supposed to avoid, right? Some of which
Yeah,
are
sneezing,
somewhat
yeah.
embarrassing, and others are, a little, are just sort of normalish distractions. But in those cases, right? So, I mean, obviously taking on that responsibility, a responsibility that is a mitzvah, right? I mean,
Right.
like it's like, okay, this is a response. This is something we need, not just something that, gee, it would be nice. I mean, like we need people to do these things, and it is a mitzvah. So, sometimes like take care of this mitzvah before you do another mitzvah, right? Take care of one before you do the other. Okay. Now, again, this is not an endorsement, the second part here. I do not endorse this necessarily. I just want to, I'm reading what it's on there. Women and slaves, even though they are exempt from the recitation of the Shema, are obligated in the Amidah prayer because it is a positive mitzvah that is not limited by time. And children that have reached the age for education, we are obligated to educate them. Okay, so for background, in case we haven't, we didn't know that the old idea, which for some still is a current idea, not by us, but okay, but the idea is that women are exempt from almost all time-bound mitzvot, almost all commandments that are not required by time. Now, that are not, limited by time. So,
I mean, that are limited by time.
right. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yes. And so, now the problem is not so much that there is an exemption, to my mind. The problem is that how it was interpreted by most Jewish sources for many years was that exemption means you can't do it, as opposed to you don't have to do it, right? And that's where you start getting into these misogynistic ideas of like, oh, well, men need to busy themselves with prayer since women are exempt, don't have them take to do that because that takes away from a man's ability to do it. That's the problem in the thinking. Well, the biggest problem in the thinking, right? And one way that the conservative movement was sort of was able to adapt and to make things more egalitarian was to essentially say that, okay, even if we accept the idea that women are exempt from time-bound commandments, there's no reason why a woman could not elect to take on those commandments, right? It's like, so it's
versus exclusion.
Exactly. So the idea of, so in other words, leading, certain prayers. It's like, leading certain prayers or reading Torah or Haftarah or things like that. It's like, no. They're exempt, so we can't get in the way of a man who has to do these things.
Isn't it kind of like saying they're supposed to be busy cooking and taking care of the children, so they haven't got time?
Those are some of the other cultural barriers that were put over women over the years, which so again, it's so the way that the conservative movement dealt with this is that they said, okay, we're not removing this from the books, but we are saying that exemption does not mean exclusion. And does not mean that one cannot choose to do so.
I know you're not a Reform rabbi, but is that the same justification the Reform did? They just chose to ignore it. I mean, do they have to rationalize it? They say, well, we ain't going to do that.
Well, it's kind of. You're not so, but and let me explain what I mean by that. Reform movement essentially said that laws of ritual for any Jew, one has choice in what they follow. Rules of ethics are not optional. But there is autonomy when it comes to rules of ritual. And so that belief is an important belief. So it's not it's not that the reform movement is saying, who cares? But it is, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, Will, but what the reform movement is like, since they have this philosophy of what is required and what is optional, therefore that which is optional, then anyone can and should be a part of things. So they come to a similar answer through a different method. So I do want to, apart from the whole, question of gender and egalitarianism, I do want to point out that that differentiation between the Shema and the Amidah. The idea that is that the Shema is time bound, whereas the Amidah, you have a little more leeway. The Amidah is recited 3 times a day, and there are methods in halacha that tell you, okay, if you said the Amidah if you said the morning Amidah when it wasn't morning anymore, you still get partial credit, is kind of what they're saying, right? I don't know who's keeping count, but right, exactly. But no, but it actually says like you get credit for the mitzvah of saying it. You don't get credit for the mitzvah of saying it at the right time, but at least you get some credits, right? Which just reminds me of math class. Because partial credit, I mean, hey, I wouldn't have passed math if it weren't for partial credits. As the late Tom Lehrer said about the new math, the idea is not to get the right answer. The idea is to show you know what you're doing. And so it's like if you show some inkling of that, partial credit, great. So that was my math career. So anyway, so that's your so anyway, so that's something just important to note in terms of distinctions between these two major prayers. But obviously today we lump the two together in many ways because we have Sidurim, we have the prayer books, and it's like, all right, well, here's the Shema, here's the Amidah, it's well ingrained in us, and very accessible. Okay. This is interesting. One for whom Torah study is one's profession. For example, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his companions interrupts Torah study for the recitation of the Shema, but not for the Amidah prayer. And it's the same principle, right? The idea that like the Shema has to be like it's when you lie down and when you rise up, like it's got to be in that, right? And there's actually a story that we commonly refer to in our Passover Seders, right? There's a story of these rabbis who were talking in a cave in Bnei Brak, who were saying, who were talking, at great length about talking about the Exodus and all the details and what have you. And then their students come in and say, hey, sorry, we have to say the morning Shema. It's like, and I know you didn't realize it because you're in a cave and it's dark, but we just took a look and it's it's sunny outside. So that is a very kind of a real life example of that. And so, but the Amidah, right, where it's like if you're highly engaged in study and just don't want to be interrupted, it's like, all right, worst comes to worst. If you say the Amidah a little late, again, partial credits. So, okay. But we do interrupt studies, whether for the recitation of the Shema or for the Amidah prayer. Meaning, so, okay, it just contradicted itself.
Mhm.
I guess it says, like, maybe it's saying this because, like the rest of us do interrupt studies. Because because let's say you're a teacher and not necessarily, let's say, it's like if you're a teacher, if you're on a roll, you keep going.
Mhm.
Is the sense I get from this.
That's your profession.
It's your profession, right? You're not going to just, say never mind. But for the rest of us who may be students, right? And it's like, okay, then it's like, all right, we can, since your profession doesn't depend on it, then it's not going to hurt anything by saying, okay, you know what? I have this amount of time. I can, I gotta go. I gotta go and do other things, right? I have to be able to say the Shema and the Amidah at the right time. Understandable. Now, here's the Ashkenazic gloss. If one is teaching others, one does not interrupt, as explained above. Nevertheless, one should interrupt and recite the first verse of the recitation of the Shema. So, in other words, if nothing else, even the teacher, at least if I'm reading this correctly, even the teacher, like if you're in a time bind and you're still, and you're still in the midst of your studies, you should at least say, okay, guys, we at least need to go Shema Yisrael, right? We still need to say that first line. And if the time of the recitation of the Shema or prayer is not passing, and one still has time left to pray or to recite the recitation of the Shema, one does not interrupt at all, but finishes studying first. Okay, man, that should be pretty straightforward. Part of what is involved in all of this is, I mean, this sounds obvious, but this is a 16th century document written before we had alarms on our phones, and you know what I'm saying? Like, we don't these days it's like, okay, it's very easy to be able to say, okay, class is from this time to this time, prayer is from that time to that. Like, it's very simple and straightforward. You're dealing with a time where you obviously didn't have these conveniences. And the other thing to note is that not necessarily in the 16th century, but when some of these laws were put down before that time, we're talking pre-printing press. And we're talking a circumstance where the teacher might be the only one with a book. So they're the only one, so they really are in charge of the lesson. And everyone else is dependent on this person. So it's it's not like the student can just go, okay, I'll just read ahead when they don't have the book. Right. And you're also dealing with literacy rates that are much lower than today, even though literacy rates among Jews have historically been higher than most people historically, but still it wasn't universal necessarily. So, okay. Thoughts or questions in this Siman? Okay. We are going to go to the next. I'm going to advance the screen and hand out, because I pre-printed these for.
I have, this is like.
Yeah, go for it.
This is actually kind of a stupid question, but you had to have a minion to do this. Like
to do what?
To recite the Amidah. To recite, I mean, like my husband and I couldn't be home alone reciting this.
Sure. You could.
You could. You don't have to have a minion. It still counts if you don't have a minion. Okay.
Right. The Amidah can be
sure.
recited. The one thing that you have to have in the Amidah to have a minyan. The one thing you have to have a minyan to say is the Kedusha,
Okay,
right? So
right,
so
Okay.
like you don't say, the Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Now
that part, right,
there is actually a part when you're praying by yourself where you say like it's like two lines and it ends with Baruch atah Adonai ha'el hakadosh. That's what
Okay.
but this whole, tiptoes and the whole, all the
that
whole
part,
rigmarole we do,
I'm very familiar
that
with it.
that you need a minion for.
I see, okay, thank you, didn't know
No
that.
worries. No worries.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
If
Yeah.
you're praying alone at home.
Yeah.
Again, I think I read somewhere that you're not supposed to pray mentally. You're supposed to at least whisper the prayer. There should be an auditory component.
Yeah. The idea is to and it gets more complicated when you're in a in communal prayer, right? Because on one hand, yeah, the matter of volume can be an interesting thing, because yeah, you are supposed to kind of whisper it so that you can hear it, but not at a volume that is distracting to other people. So, and some people don't really deal with that part, that last part, very well. Um, uh, and I would acknowledge that some of these are colleagues of mine who, and by the way, I'm not saying this like about, certainly not all rabbis, but I mean, but like I've been, if you've ever prayed in a room full of rabbis and cantors, every once in a while there are people who are like, like, I mean, like and they are, and then sometimes it's like, like they're just sort of doing they're doing, and they're doing, and it's kind of like, aren't I so pious, is the way it kind of appears sometimes. And I will give you a couple of examples real quick. Uh, there's this one guy. There was this one time where there was somebody praying, and it was in the middle of it was like the page or two leading up to the Amidah, in which the word emet, truth, is mentioned a bunch of times in a row. And he just had this sort of loud, grating voice, and you hear emet, 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 and I'm like, so, and we were in New York. This was in New York, and I'm sitting there going, I'm just waiting for him to go. And my favorite baseball team is the Mets. I figured that was coming at some point. But and I'm sitting there going like why why do you need to do it? And but it is a fine line, right? Because like especially leaders in the Jewish community want to set a good example about being engaged in prayer, right? That's a good thing, right? That's a positive thing for other people to follow. The challenge becomes when, like, I mean, but there is a fine line between doing that and then showing off and or distracting other people. Um, the best story I ever heard about distraction during services, and this isn't about prayer per se, but I was told a story in Winnipeg, where I was born, that in Winnipeg, one Rosh Hashanah morning, Mrs. Schwartz showed up to synagogue in her new fur coat. And she was very proud of this fur coat. And she was parading in the aisles, like, doing that, right? And this was happening as the rabbi was chanting the Haftarah, and so in the middle of the Haftarah, this rabbi, who just had a wicked sense of humor, in the middle of it, he inserts the spontaneous verse, Mrs. Schwartz, everyone has seen your coat. Please sit down. And Mrs. Schwartz did not get up the rest of the service. He was like,
Oh my, oh dear.
and now I do not endorse that kind of I mean there were other ways to handle it, obviously, but I think for a lot of people there, they were like, yeah, Mrs. Schwartz, you could have toned it down beforehand. It was like, okay.
You were
Um,
talking about the printing press, and
yeah,
I don't know if it's all just the Orthodox, but you see, like the Orthodox, I don't know, the seminary receivers or whatever, the style is used. Apparently, they got partners or whatever here all the time, or if they discuss back and forth the meaning of stuff.
yeah,
Were
you're
they doing
talking
that before the printing press? And all rabbinic
sure.
students do that.
Sure, they were. I mean, so what you're speaking of is Chavruta study. So Chavruta study is when you are usually two people. Every once in a while, you can have like a third or fourth in there, but really, it's two people like reading the text and then discussing, sometimes arguing. And like I mean, so if you walk into a yeshiva or any kind of like Beit Midrash, any kind of house of study where people are studying by Chavruta, it's loud. I mean, it can get very loud, and it's kind of culturally acceptable for it to be loud because the idea is that the oral recitation really matters. That has been going on for a long time. So, like before printing press. So I would say that was a fairly common thing.
Is that just an Orthodox thing, or all?
I was when I was in seminary, we could shout it out like the best of them. So I know it's not just an Orthodox thing. Yeah, Chavruta study is something that I think any Jew can and anyone can do. So, all right. Now we get into the question of one who is in doubt if one prayed. In other words, we all have these moments where it's like, did what? Did I already say this? Like, it happens, right? Right? If one is in doubt, if one prayed the Amidah, and now look, maybe you say to yourself, okay, how could you forget that you omitted such a lengthy prayer? First of all, I don't plan to presume on people. I don't presume on people's memories, but I also want to emphasize that that even if it's very simple to remember whether you prayed the Amidah or not, you might forget whether you prayed a word or a sentence or something like that. Like, like your eyes might dart back. Oh, wait a second. Did I already say that? Like all that can happen. And the idea is that like you really are supposed to do it. You really are supposed to, to do it pretty completely. So if you're in doubt, then one goes back and prays the Amidah again. Now, to say to yourself, okay, oh, I missed a word, I need to start all over again. Yeah, maybe that's a little much, but the idea is that like, it goes to show of the just the vital importance of all the words, right? One goes back and prays the Amidah, and one does not need to innovate anything new in the prayer. Yeah, what's that about? Let me see. Below chidush, right? You don't throw anything in there.
What would you add? I mean, you're not supposed to add or subtract anything anyway.
Right.
So
Um,
is it the word that you might have left out? Or is it or a phrase?
is it a word or phrase that he might have forgotten?
I don't know.
Or is it because your mind was wandering and they're concerned that you're not going back on focus?
Yeah, maybe that's.
I think that's it.
Yeah, I would go with that. Yeah, that makes sense. Because because I'm a little little puzzled myself with that. I think that makes more sense that, um, uh, you know, and look, there is a story told about this is from, I think, the Talmud, where a prayer leader goes up to lead and he starts vamping. Like he starts kind of like, we're vamping, improving, if you will, where he's like, like starts to basically just like go off script and just sort of like add his own interpretations or flourishes or what have you. And the story goes that this rabbi says, okay, stop. We own, like there are limits to what we can say about God with certainty. And what the rabbi pointed to was what we refer to as the 13 attributes that's first mentioned in the book of Exodus, right? Adonai El Rachum V'Chanun Erech Apayim, like, to talk about like God's mercy and kindness and loyalty and forgiveness. I mean, like those are things we can say because Moses said it on Mount Sinai when looking at God's back, at least according to how the story goes. So we can say that, and the thought is that the prayers that we say, at least the prayers, certainly of rabbinic time, is supposed to basically be about those things. So if you're, so if you start adding extra stuff, then okay, wait a second, like it's almost considered sacrilegious because it's like we're not doing, like, why are we saying things definitively that we can't actually back up necessarily? So yes, this idea of not innovating is very important. Now, as I think we may have mentioned, there are times where, like I think we talked maybe last week or the week before about the Elohai Netzor paragraph, which is the paragraph where we're at the end of the Amidah, where we say, God, keep me away from evil speech and other things like that. That is technically not a part of the Amidah. We've attached it to the end of the Amidah out of custom. And it does fit in sort of, certainly when it comes to the sort of the tone and the basic idea. But that's something we add. But for the most part, the idea is that we're very reluctant to just spontaneously add stuff, throw stuff in. All right. So, but if it's clear to one that one prayed, one does not go back and pray again without an innovation, i.e. something new added to his prayer. In other words, now, so this kind of flies in the face of it, right? A little bit. And it does speak to the idea of the difference between, that maybe some things when it comes to keva and kavanah had not necessarily been worked out. Keva referring to set prayer and kavanah referring to, what we often call intention or concentration, but it does refer to a certain amount of spontaneity. And I would say even the earliest rabbis acknowledge that prayer has to have a bit of both. So it's like, are we supposed to add or subtract anything? No, but yes. Is that clear? No, of course. No, not at all. No. But like here's what I would say. Is it somewhat is it contradictory? Yes, it is contradictory. What I think and this is where I think some of where there's been divergence in some of our modern North American movements, which is that typically the Orthodox point of view on really matters of halakha in general is that we can only add, we can't subtract. We can only add strictures, we can't take away strictures. We can only add to the fence around the Torah. Okay. And what the conservative movement says is that we can subtract things when we have some sort of precedent to subtract things, meaning if it's a prayer that has been added to our liturgy relatively recently, it's not as set in stone, if you will, that we have to do it for all time. This is why, you know, when I was talking earlier about like, all right, what are some like bare minimum prayers we have to say? I'm always going to go to the oldest, or almost always going to go to the oldest of prayers because those are the ones that have been most firmly established. And prayers that have not been as firmly established, we say are not necessarily part of the core. I may have mentioned this before, but this was one thing that I really had to deal with during COVID, especially during the high holidays, when there were 2 high holidays in a row where not only were we limiting the number of people in the room, but we were also limiting how long we could be there to limit exposure. And so, you know, and one of the years, I mean, people walked away from the services saying, what was that? And I said, doctor's orders. I mean, literally, doctors, you know, like the doctors in the congregation who had been dealing with COVID and everything like that, they're the ones who made kind of this say, like, hey, let's get it done within this amount of time. And that's what we had to do. And so therefore, I had to go to some of the oldest prayers and not some of the newer ones. So I think that's where some of the innovation, you know, comes from. Now, and by means of using an innovation,
prayer book
is what in the prayer book.
Was you using a different prayer book, or did picking prayers out of the regular prayer book?
Yeah, no, using the same prayer book, just sort of, you know, we skipped. We skipped more and more. Some people prefer to walk instead of skip, or run instead of skip. Sorry, no, that's I'm being silly. But we would just jump around a little bit from the prayers.
Nila, and I still did it myself at that time.
Yeah.
And that was the last year, I think, that I actually did it by myself because then I got sick. And it was the rabbi, me, and Marcus.
In the room.
Only people in the synagogue, and
Yeah.
the rest were on Zoom. So, and I think and Nila doesn't go 90 minutes, so that I think that was the amount of time that you could be in the community.
Yeah.
And so Nila takes about an hour, so it didn't, you know, we didn't get up to that time limit. And so that wasn't a problem, but we had just 3 people in the synagogue.
Yeah.
In the sanctuary.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it was I had many of those Saturday mornings where, yeah, it was me, the cantor, this was in Buffalo, me, the cantor, and then one congregant who usually was there to do the Haftorah, and it's like, hey, why don't you do the, you know, the prayer for the country, and, you know, what have you, like, to give you something to do, you know, give it, because you know, here you are risking yourself to whatever extent. So but yeah. So, and by means of using an innovation in one's prayer, one may return and pray as a voluntary Amidah as many times as one wants, except for the Musaf prayer, for we do not pray it as a voluntary Amidah. I don't have much to say on this. I don't really know why Musaf can't be a like why you can't repeat, you know, say the Musaf prayer again because
it refers to the temple sacrifices.
Maybe, yeah.
So
Maybe because of the temple sacrifices. Yeah, it could very well be. That's a good question. On Shabbat and Yom Tov, one may not pray a voluntary prayer at all. Okay.
Is that in service or in their home?
I think regardless. I think regardless whether you're in a community or by yourself. Yeah.
That seems kind of weird. I don't know.
Yeah.
You can't add. I mean, I understand why you can't subtract, but you can't just, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, maybe just because of the, you know, if I had to make a guess, I would say it would have something to do with the idea that Shabbat and Yom Tov, part of your responsibility is to celebrate the day. And my presumption is if you were in synagogue all day long, just adding more and more voluntary prayers, you would miss out on some of the other things that are part of the enjoyment of the day. In other words, like think of like Sukkot, right? If you're, if you're just in the synagogue all day praying, you don't get to, enjoy being in the sukkah, right? You don't get that part of it. Yom Kippur is a different animal because Yom Kippur is about that process of repentance. So you can, so that's one where, that I think that would be sort of the exception. Now, if one began to pray the Amidah under the belief that one did not pray already, and then in the middle of one's prayer, remembered that one already prayed it, one immediately stops, even in the middle of a blessing, even if one is able to innovate a new thing into it. So, which I recognize that might sound kind of absurd, but I mean, we do have these moments where it's like, oh, I forgot whether I did this. I forgot whether this. Oh, wait, yeah, I did this. Oh, yeah. I mean, that does happen, right?
I do it all the time.
Yeah. So I mean, I think this is a very human thing. Like, I would compare it to let's say you're reading a book and you have a book, you like if you stick the bookmark falls out. And then then you're like, oh shoot, where was I? Okay, so you're like, I'm not sure. Let me go back to this, and it's like, and you start doing it, and you're like, oh no, I did read this. Okay, all right.
It
So
happens to
like,
me all the time. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So I would compare it to that. I would compare it to that sort of thing. So okay, so maybe one more little thing here. Talking about innovations. This innovation that we mentioned above means that one innovates something in each blessing of the middle ones, meaning the middle 13 blessings of the Amidah that relates to that particular blessing. Okay, so let me give you an example. Here, let me I'll get a Siddur and I will to give you a real life example. Okay. Okay. So in the middle blessings of the Amidah, in which we talk about here are things we're asking for. This is the closest we come to like a request list. The first one is Atachanen le'adam dad. You graciously endow mortals with intelligence, teaching wisdom and understanding. Grant us knowledge, discernment, and wisdom. Praised are you, Adonai, who graciously grants intelligence. That's one of the blessings in full. So you could imagine somebody saying, you graciously endow mortals with intelligence, teaching wisdom and understanding. If one were so inclined, maybe they would throw in, you enable us to, you enable brilliant people to create technologies beyond anything we could have predicted, right? You have, you've made us really good at medicine, right? And creating new medicines, but I mean, I'm obviously just making this up too, right? As I go along, but like, as long as you go back and say all the other stuff in that prayer, according to this, That's an innovation you can talk about. That's an innovation that you can throw in. And if one innovated something in even just one of the middle blessings, that is sufficient in order to indicate that it is a voluntary prayer and not an obligatory one. So this, I think, helps, at least us understanding what we mean by an innovation. Like, it has to do with these middle prayers of the weekday Amidah that talk about what we are asking God for.
So if we've done our obligatory prayer, the obligatory Amidah, there we're not allowed to do any in innovations. But if we decide to do the Amidah a second time, we can add some additional stuff.
I think so. I think
Yeah.
that's the idea. So it's like, if you want to, like, and honestly, and knowing this, I don't, to me, it feels pretty good to be able to say, like, all right, I'm not limited to the words in here. Sometimes, you'll be in prayer services. I think Rabbi Shush, uses this sometimes in the contemporary service. Like, if you want to reflect upon the words of your heart or something along those lines. I would say that is maybe a little bit outside of what this idea here. I'm not, this is not a criticism of her, but I was just saying, like, it's maybe, it maybe goes, it's maybe a little more lenient, I would say. Okay. But
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
but there's but even within sort of this, I mean, look, law codes are generally, they're meant to be among the stodgier things that we have, right? They're among the more rigid. So even within that, we do have some sense of flexibility. Now, we'll just close here with the gloss here, that there are those who say it's not called an innovation unless something was added into it that one did not need beforehand. In other words, if it's not original, if you're not adding something original, then it's not much of an innovation. So let's say, you had a tradition in your community to say, to that prayer that I was mentioning before, that, like, we are grateful to all of the advancements in science. Well, if that became sort of customary among a certain, a community to say, then the argument here is that that's not necessarily a change, right? I mean, that's kind of like, or that at a certain point, it's not a change anymore. It would be a change if then one day somebody threw in and psychology, right? Or, and math, or whatever it might be, right? So if they were to start adding, like, in other words, like, you'd have to make it, there comes a point where any additions go from being original to standard.
Yeah.
So,
Like the prayer for the captives.
prayer for the captives,
Yeah,
right?
it became standard, but
For our congregation,
yeah,
Yeah.
it did.
and for many others.
Yeah.
So yeah. All right. Well, to respect everybody's time, I want to, I think maybe we should stop there. But I hope, but a lovely. I appreciate having people in person. I certainly always appreciate those on Zoom. And just for scheduling, next Wednesday is, as we call it in Judaism, Erev Christmas. It's December 24th. I see no reason why we can't have lunch and learn. I see no reason why we can't do that. I am going to ask that on December 31st, Erev Rosh Hashanah, It'll be New Year's Eve, right? That's right. December 31st, I'm going to not have, and that's not because of anything religious. It's more because of a break, just a little vacation from it. So we will meet December 24th, not the 31st, and then we'll
Be-
jump right back into it in 2026.
Could you explain the joke? I thought that was interesting.
The joke of
Air Christmas.
Erev Christmas. Yeah, just that it's Christmas Eve, so Erev
Erev.
meaning the air. Yeah, exactly. So
Is that saying ARIB like
yeah,
Muslim?
E-R-E-V.
no, EREV.
Oh,
Like 'twas the night before.
Evening, yeah, night before, exactly. The Erev Rosh Hashanah means the evening before Rosh
Okay.
Hashanah.
Yeah, sorry for being unclear. Yeah. All right. Well, good. Not Arab. No. We're not talking about that. No, I mean, we welcome all. We welcome all. All right. Have a good rest of Hanukkah, and we'll see you soon.
be afford-
Thank you.